Dawn crept slowly over the cold horizon, the sea wrapped in a heavy shroud of mist. The small monastery on the rocky coast stood silent, its bells ready to call the faithful to prayer. The monks inside whispered their chants, their voices echoing softly against the stone walls. They believed themselves far from the chaos of the world, yet the ocean had carried the chaos straight to their doorstep. Out of the fog, the first dragon-headed prow broke through, its wooden beast snarling at the shore. More followed, silent and steady, their sails furled to keep the approach hidden. Dozens of longships glided across the waves as though summoned by unseen gods, the water hissing against their hulls. On board stood men with plaited hair and painted shields, their faces lit with anticipation and greed. This was not their first raid, but to their leaders, it was unlike any other. Two chieftains, Sigvard the Wolf and Eirik the Red-Eyed, commanded this assault together, a partnership whispered about but never believed possible. Their clans had feuded for decades, spilling blood over borders and broken oaths. But in secret, under the cover of night and the promise of riches, they had clasped hands and sworn to unite for this single raid. Neither trusted the other, both planned betrayal. The monastery fell quickly. The monks, armed only with faith, were no match for axes and fire. Doors splintered, tapestries were torn from the walls, and the sweet scent of incense gave way to smoke and blood. Sigvard's men dragged gilded chalices and reliquaries from the altar, while Eirik's warriors pried iron-bound chests from the vault. Outside, flames licked the roof as smoke curled into the gray sky. But not all treasures were golden. Hidden in a carved wooden case, overlooked by careless hands, lay a scroll older than the monastery itself. Weather-stained, its ink faded but not forgotten. A young monk, desperate to save it, fled with the relic clutched to his chest. He ran straight into the path of Eirik's men. Bound and thrown to the ground, the monk screamed prayers, but none listened. When Eirik tore the scroll from his grasp, his cruel smile widened. This was no ordinary text. It spoke of lands west of the setting sun, lands said to be rich and untouched. Amid the plunder, a shadow of treachery stirred. In the heat of battle, Sigvard deliberately left Eirik's warriors unsupported against a surge of desperate defenders. Several of Eirik's kin fell, their bodies broken on the monastery steps. The betrayal was small, but the insult was vast. Eirik's burning eyes met Sigvard's across the smoke-filled courtyard, and in that glance lay a promise of vengeance. When the longships pushed back into the sea, the monastery was nothing but charred stone. The monks who survived would tell of heathens and monsters, but the true story, the alliance forged, the betrayal sown, the scroll stolen, was carried only by the Vikings. Few among them realized the raid's spoils would echo far beyond their generation. What appeared to be yet another act of brutality was in truth the spark of a saga that would unravel loyalties, spread across oceans, and blur the line between plunderers and pioneers. The raid had given them silver, slaves, and stories to boast of in the mead halls, but beneath the surface, something far more dangerous was brewing. Sigvard the Wolf and Eirik the Red-Eyed returned to their halls as heroes, yet their alliance was already poisoned by suspicion. Each had tasted victory differently. Sigvard with his coffers of silver, Eirik with the mysterious scroll that whispered of lands beyond the sea. Both were hungry, but for different prizes. As winter closed in on the fjords, feasts filled the longhouses. Flames danced in the great hearths, spilling light across drinking horns and fur-draped benches. Warriors raised their cups, singing songs of conquest, yet their lords sat in silence, weighing choices heavier than gold. Was the future of the North to be won through raids of blood, or through the quiet power of trade? Sigvard, ever cunning, began secret dealings with merchants who traveled the icy rivers southward. From the distant markets of the Rus came silks, spices, and silver coins stamped with the mark of faraway caliphs. He envisioned an empire of wealth where his clan would rise not only on the edge of an axe, but through control of trade routes spanning half the known world. Eirik, however, burned with a different fire. Glory, not coin, was his desire. He believed the gods rewarded those who carved their names into history with blood and fire. His men mocked traders as weaklings who bowed for silver instead of seizing it. To him, the scroll promised something greater than riches. It spoke of conquest on a scale no Viking had yet imagined. He dreamed of planting dragon-headed ships in a land untouched by rival kings, a realm where his name would be sung for generations. Their followers mirrored their lord's ambitions, and soon whispers filled the halls. Sigvard's men spoke of silver rivers and the wealth of Baghdad's markets. Eirik's warriors sharpened their axes, eager for glory on distant shores. The fragile unity between the clans began to fracture. To the outside world, the Vikings seemed united in their ferocity, but inside, division spread like cracks in ice. The tension came to a head during a winter feast. Amid the clash of drinking horns, Eirik raised his voice above the roar. "What is silver but a coward's prize? The gods do not feast in Valhalla on coin. They welcome warriors who die with blood on their blades." Sigvard answered with cold precision. "And what is glory to a starving child? What is fame when winter takes your kin? Trade brings life, while your fire and rage will leave only ashes." The hall fell silent. For a moment, it seemed steel would be drawn, but the clash never came, at least not yet. Instead, both men retreated into their schemes, smiling across the firelight while plotting daggers in the dark. What began as a raid had transformed into a dangerous question that would divide the North. Was the Viking Age to be written in gold or glory? While warriors argued over gold and glory, a quieter storm was brewing, one that would strike deeper than any axe. In Sigvard's hall, beneath the flicker of torchlight, his daughter Astrid walked with grace and fire. Fiercely independent, with hair the color of autumn wheat and eyes sharp as a hawk's, she had inherited her father's cunning, but not his thirst for endless scheming. Astrid longed for a destiny of her own, not one dictated by clan politics. Fate answered her in the most forbidden form, a captive monk taken during the monastery raid. His name was Aiden, a man of faith who spoke in a tongue foreign to her people. At first, Astrid approached him with curiosity, mocking his strange prayers, testing his resolve with sharp questions. But curiosity softened into something more dangerous. His quiet strength and unshakable belief in mercy fascinated her. And for Aiden, the fiery shield maiden who defied her father's authority was a vision of freedom he had never dared dream of. Their stolen meetings began in shadows. Astrid sneaking past guards to bring Aiden food, listening to his stories of lands far to the south, where cities gleamed and rulers held power through knowledge, not axes. Their conversations became confessions. Confessions turned into touches, and touches ignited a forbidden love. But secrets never stay hidden in a Viking hall. One winter's night, a warrior loyal to Eric stumbled upon them, Astrid's hand clasped in the monk's. He said nothing then, but his eyes promised ruin. Soon whispers spread like wildfire. Sigvard's daughter was tainted by a slave, a man of the cross. When Eric heard the rumors, he seized his chance to strike at his rival. During a feast, with both clans present, he rose and mocked Sigvard before the hall. "Tell us, wolf, while you count your silver, do you also count the nights your daughter spends with a southern dog in chains?" The hall erupted. Warriors slammed their fists, women gasped, and Sigvard's face turned pale with rage. Astrid stood defiant, her voice cutting through the storm. "Better to love a man of honor in chains than a liar with blood on his hands." Her words cut deeper than any blade, shaming both her father and his fragile alliance with Eric. The fallout was catastrophic. Sigvard ordered Aiden's execution to silence the scandal, but Astrid intervened, helping him escape under the cover of darkness. The betrayal split the hall. Some admired her courage, others called her treacherous. Eric, delighted by the chaos, spread the tale to other clans, turning Sigvard into a laughingstock and weakening his authority. But Astrid and Aiden's love was not the end of the story. Their flight carried with it a secret far greater than romance. Aiden had seen the scroll Eric stole during the raid. He knew its markings, and he whispered to Astrid of the western lands it described. Together, they became more than lovers. They became dangerous witnesses to a truth that could shift the balance of power. The betrayal was no longer just of the heart. It was political, spiritual, and potentially catastrophic. What began as a forbidden romance had become a weapon in the hands of those hungry for power. The stolen scroll that Eric carried from the burning monastery was no simple relic. At first glance, it appeared fragile and faded, filled with strange symbols and cryptic notes in a monk's careful hand. But when unrolled in the torchlight of his hall, the markings revealed something extraordinary. Sketches of coastlines unlike any known in Europe, accompanied by riddling Latin words hinting at fertile lands across the endless western sea. To Eric, it was not parchment, it was prophecy. He believed the gods themselves had placed this map in his hands, a sign that his destiny was greater than plundered silver or fleeting alliances. With this secret, he could rise above all rival jarls, becoming not just a raider of kingdoms, but a founder of a new world. But fate would not allow him to keep the secret so easily. Unknown to Eric, the escaped monk Aiden had once studied that very scroll in the monastery scriptorium. He knew its hidden meanings, the references to ancient voyages whispered about by wandering sailors, perhaps even remnants of forgotten Celtic expeditions. When he fled with Astrid into the night, he carried those memories with him, a living key to unlock the scroll's true purpose. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the fjords. Word of a mysterious map of the West reached the ears of merchants and warriors alike. Some dismissed it as monkish fantasy, but others dreamed of untouched lands, overflowing with timber, game, and wealth beyond measure. Rival clans grew restless, each wondering who truly possessed this map and how far would they go to claim it. The tension erupted when a merchant from the east, a man who had traded in the souks of Baghdad and the palaces of Byzantine, recognized a fragment of the symbols when Eric carelessly displayed them at a private feast. The merchant muttered of ancient trade routes and forgotten voyages, hinting that the scroll was part of a greater knowledge guarded jealously by foreign scholars. Eric silenced him with a blade, but not before others heard enough to fan the flames of greed. Astrid and Aiden, hiding in secret, realized the scroll was no longer just an artifact, it was the heart of a storm. Aiden whispered to Astrid of how the note spoke of a voyage attempted long ago, a voyage that ended in death, but promised untold riches if completed. To protect this knowledge, they had to stay ahead of Eric's men, who scoured the fjords to drag them back. The map became more than ink on parchment. It became a weapon, a prize worth killing for, worth betraying for, worth sailing into the unknown for. And in the shadows of every hall, warriors asked themselves a dangerous question. If the West was real, who would dare seize it first? In the North, oaths were sworn with fire and blood, bound before gods who demanded loyalty and vengeance in equal measure. But when greed and ambition gnawed at men's hearts, even the most sacred vows became little more than words whispered in smoke. The scroll had begun to work its poison. Whispers of Western lands spread from feasting hall to feasting hall. To many, it was only rumor. To others, it was salvation. Winter was harsh, rivalries endless. What if a new world truly waited beyond the horizon? Gold, timber, fertile fields, a kingdom free of kings. Sigvard the Wolf, humiliated by his daughter's betrayal and mocked in the mead halls, sought to regain his power. He reached out to lesser jarls, swearing new alliances sealed with oaths of brotherhood. At great fires, warriors cut their palms and let their blood fall together into bowls of mead, drinking to promises of loyalty. They pledged to raid together, trade together, and, when the time came, share in the spoils of the mysterious Western voyage. But in the very same nights, daggers were sharpened behind closed doors. One of Sigvard's new allies, Jarl Håkon, secretly sent envoys south to strike deals with merchants from Kiev, offering them weapons and furs in exchange for silks and eastern steel. Håkon intended to use this wealth to buy loyalty away from Sigvard himself. Meanwhile, Eric the Red-Eyed, consumed by his obsession with the scroll, swore his own oath before his men. He would not rest until the lands of the West were his. He promised spoils greater than Rome, a destiny that would eclipse all rivals. His words bound his warriors, but his actions betrayed them. Eric secretly withheld the map's details from all but his closest kin, guarding it as though it were a crown. When news of Astrid and Aiden's survival reached him, Eric's fury burned hotter than any forge. He declared them oath-breakers, accusing Sigvard of treachery for harboring them. In truth, he feared what Aiden might reveal, that the monk, not the map, held the true knowledge of the Western lands. The breaking point came at a council of jarls, where leaders gathered to negotiate peace between feuding clans. Before the assembly, Sigvard swore upon the gods that he had no hand in Astrid's escape. Eric, smiling coldly, raised his hand in oath as well, swearing he sought only to unite the North for the glory of all. But both men lied, and every jarl in the hall knew it. The blood spilled into bowls that night was bitter, poisoned by distrust. Promises were made only to be broken, and even as warriors clasped hands in unity, their hearts burned with schemes of betrayal. From that night forward, the North was no longer a land of brothers bound by honor. It was a cauldron of treachery, where every oath masked a dagger and every promise concealed a plan. And at its center, the map of the West pulsed like a heartbeat, drawing them all closer to the betrayal that would shatter the clans forever. While the north seethed with oaths and betrayals, some Vikings sailed far beyond the fjords, following rivers and seas into the beating heart of foreign empires. Among them were mercenaries who swore themselves to the service of the mighty Byzantine emperor, their axes now turned to the highest bidder. Erik the Red-Eyed saw opportunity in this. With the map in his possession, he needed wealth, ships, and knowledge of distant seas. So he sent his brother, Bjorn Ironsong, at the head of a company of hardened warriors to Constantinople, the jewel of the East. There they entered the ranks of the Varangian Guard, the emperor's feared northern bodyguards, famed for their loyalty, until gold and ambition pulled their strings. Constantinople dazzled the Norsemen. Its domes gleamed in the sun like the shields of the gods. Its markets overflowed with silks, spices, and strange coins. But beneath the splendor lurked a world as treacherous as any Viking hall. Courtiers whispered, spies listened from behind jeweled curtains, and every alliance came with hidden costs. Bjorn proved more dangerous than even Erik expected. In the Byzantine court, he was charmed by Princess Theodora, a woman of sharp wit and sharper ambition who saw in him a weapon to wield against her rivals. Their clandestine meetings grew into an affair of passion and conspiracy. Through her, Bjorn learned secrets of trade routes that reached India and beyond, routes that could make the Western voyage possible. But in giving him knowledge, Theodora bound him to her, dragging him into the deadly game of Byzantine politics. Meanwhile, Sigvard too reached south through different channels. His traders returned from Baghdad with tales of scholars who spoke of strange Western lands, whispered in the same breath as old sailors' legends. Though Sigvard despised Erik, he realized the stories aligned eerily with the rumors of the scroll. He began plotting. If he could secure knowledge from the east, he could outmaneuver Erik without ever needing the cursed map. The Byzantines, for their part, played their own game. They welcomed the Norsemen with gold and titles, but their spies followed every step. To them, the barbarians from the north were both shield and threat, useful pawns, but pawns nonetheless. And when word reached their ears of a map to the Western Sea, Byzantine agents began their quiet hunt. In the mead halls of the north, no one yet realized the trap being set. While Sigvard and Erik plotted against each other, the wider world had already taken notice of their ambitions. What the Jarls thought was a private feud was becoming part of a greater web, one where empires, merchants, and monarchs would fight to control not just the present, but the very future of exploration. And as Bjorn and Theodora's affair deepened, it birthed a new danger. What if knowledge of the West fell not to Viking hands, but to the empire of Byzantium? In every Viking hall, amid the clash of horns and the smoke of roasting meat, there was always a skald, a poet, keeper of memory and weaver of sagas. Their words were more than entertainment. They were the threads that bound history, myth, and prophecy together. But sometimes, words carried truths too dangerous to be spoken openly. One such skald was Kjell the Wanderer, a thin, sharp-eyed poet who had traveled further than most warriors ever dreamed. Some whispered he had walked the streets of Dublin, traded in Frankish markets, and even listened at the gates of Moorish Spain. Wherever he went, he carried stories and secrets. When he returned to the north, Kjell's verses seemed harmless, tales of distant seas, of heroes who sailed westward chasing the setting sun. His sagas spoke of storms that swallowed ships whole, of a green land glimpsed through fog, of voyagers who never returned. The audience roared with laughter and wonder, drinking deeply as they listened. But not everyone was fooled. Astrid, now living in hiding with Aidan,
heard Kjell's one song in a crowded market. To others, it was a fanciful tale, but to her ears, the imagery was unmistakable. The coastlines he described, the symbols woven into his rhyme, they matched the drawings from the stolen scroll. The poet was no mere entertainer. He was singing in code. What Astor discovered was chilling. Kjell's sagas contained veiled references to real voyages undertaken in secret long before the monastery raid. A hidden brotherhood of sailors, perhaps monks, perhaps outlaws, had attempted to chart the western seas. Their journeys had failed, but their stories had survived in fragments, passed through whispers and poems. The scroll Eric held was no isolated relic. It was only one piece of a much larger puzzle, and Kjell's verses were another. But truths wrapped in poetry are dangerous. At a feast in Eric's hall, Kjell performed one of his Western sagas. As he sang, his voice rose like thunder, speaking of a wolf who hoards maps, a red-eyed serpent who thirsts for distant shores. The hall erupted, half thinking it clever satire, the other half uneasy at its sharpness. Eric himself laughed, but his smile was cold, his knuckles white around his drinking horn. That night, Kjell barely escaped with his life. Eric's men hunted him through the dark streets, their blades eager to silence the tongue that had spoken too much. Some said he fled east, others that Astrid's allies smuggled him away. But one thing was certain: his words had already taken root. The poet's sagas were no longer just songs, they were weapons of truth, spreading whispers of the western lands to every corner of the north. And once spoken, no secret could ever truly be silenced. The fragile unity of the North had always rested on thin ice, but now that ice cracked beneath the weight of ambition. Alliances forged in fire and blood had become brittle, poisoned by betrayal. At the center of it stood two Viking brothers, Rurik and Leif, sons of the same father yet bound to opposing visions of the future. Rurik, the elder, was every inch the traditional warlord, broad-shouldered, quick to anger, and ruthless in battle. He had spilled blood on the coasts of England and Francia, earning glory and the favor of Odin. To him, the Viking way was simple: take what you desire by axe and fire, and the gods will reward you. Leif, the younger, was different. He had inherited not his father's axe arm, but his sharp mind. Where Rurik saw plunder, Leif saw opportunity. He had traveled south, seen the bustling markets of Kiev, and spoken with merchants from Baghdad. To him, trade brought more lasting power than conquest. And when rumors of the scroll in the western lands reached him, he believed destiny lay not in raiding villages, but in carving a new future across the sea. At first, their differences simmered quietly, but Eric the Red-Eyed and Sigvard the Wolf, always eager to exploit divisions, fanned the flames. Eric courted Rurik, promising him eternal glory if he fought to secure the map. Sigvard, wary but shrewd, encouraged Leif, seeing in him a potential ally who could one day outmaneuver Eric entirely. The brothers' feud erupted during a grand assembly of Jarls. Before a hall filled with warriors, Rurik thundered, "The gods made us wolves, not merchants. Glory is won with blood, not with silver scales." Leif stood calmly, his voice steady but cutting. "And what have your raids brought us? Enemies at every shore? Famine at every winter? You worship fire, but fire devours all. I will not follow you into ashes." The hall shook with divided cheers, half for Rurik's cry of honor, half for Leif's promise of prosperity. The split was no longer just between brothers. Entire clans began to choose sides, pledging loyalty not to the North as one, but to whichever brother mirrored their hopes.
When steel was finally drawn, it was not in a hall but on a battlefield. Rurik's warriors, clad in wolf pelts, stormed against Leif's smaller force along a riverbank lit by moonlight. The clash was brutal, brother against brother, kin slaying kin. Yet the fight ended not in victory but in ruin. The river ran red, and both sides limped away broken, leaving the north weaker and more divided than ever. But one thing was clear. This was no longer a struggle over gold or glory. It was a civil war. The brothers had become symbols of the very soul of the Viking Age: conquest versus diplomacy, tradition versus change, blood versus vision. And somewhere in the shadows, Astrid and Aiden watched it unfold, knowing that every drop of blood spilled only brought Eric closer to seizing the map's promise for himself. Among the clans of the North, none carried as much reverence as the Fire Keepers, a lineage sworn to guard the sacred flame said to have been lit by the gods themselves. For generations, their halls burned with a central fire that was never allowed to die, a living symbol of divine favor. Warriors sought their blessing before battle, lovers pledged themselves before the flame, and Jarls swore oaths of loyalty in its glow. But the age of oaths was unraveling, and so too would the Fire Keepers. At the height of the brothers' war, the Fire Keepers attempted to act as peacemakers, calling Sigvard, Eirik, Rurik, and Leif to parley beneath their roof. Their chief, Jarl Torvald Flameborn, was respected as a man of honor, one of the last leaders untouched by corruption. He believed that if the clans could be bound once more by the sacred fire, the North might be spared from destruction. Yet in secret, betrayal was already festering. One of Torvald's own kin, his ambitious nephew Sten, had grown wary of reverence without reward. The whispers of silver and silk from the east and of vast western lands tempted him. He struck a secret bargain with Eirik. If he delivered the Fire Keepers into chaos, Eirik would grant him rule over their lands once the voyage west began. The parley turned to disaster. As the Jarls feasted in uneasy silence, Sten struck first, murdering his uncle Torvald in front of the sacred flame. Chaos erupted in the hall. Eirik's men stormed in, blades drawn, turning the gathering into a slaughter. The sacred fire, disturbed in the struggle, was overturned and smothered beneath blood and ash. The unthinkable had happened. The flame of the Fire Keepers was extinguished. To the people of the North, this was more than murder. It was sacrilege. Whispers spread that the gods themselves had abandoned the clans. Crops withered in the fields, storms battered the coasts, and omens darkened the skies. Some said the fall of the Fire Keepers cursed the North, ensuring that no matter what lands they found across the sea, they would carry doom with them. But behind the cries of divine wrath lay cold calculation. With the Fire Keepers destroyed, Eirik stood stronger than ever. Their sacred role as peacemakers was gone, their halls reduced to smoldering ruins. Yet even in victory, Eirik's name was stained. Many clans cursed him, seeing his hand in the betrayal, even if he denied it. Astrid, upon hearing the news in her exile, wept, not only for the fall of the Fire Keepers, but for what it meant. If even the holiest of clans could be burned and broken, then there was no order left in the North. The age of honor had ended. The age of betrayal had begun. The fall of the Fire Keepers was more than the death of a clan. It was the death of trust, the shattering of faith, and the spark of vengeance that would carry the Vikings into their most fateful chapter yet. The North was broken. Clans lay in ruin, the sacred flame of the Fire Keepers was ash, and brothers had turned their swords against each other. Yet amidst the wreckage, one obsession endured: the map of the West. Eric the Red-Eyed had at last secured it, his hall brimming with the spoils of treachery. His warriors, bloodied but loyal, prepared the ships for a final voyage into the unknown. He declared before them, "The North is weak. The gods demand new lands, and I will deliver them. Across the endless sea lies our true destiny." But Eric did not sail alone. Astrid and Adin, hounded yet unbroken, had tracked the map's trail, knowing its secrets as well as he did. Hidden in their possession was not parchment, but memory. Adin's knowledge of the scroll's riddled notes preserved from long nights in the monastery scriptorium. What Eric thought he alone possessed was only half the truth. As the ships cut westward, storms battered them. Weeks passed, provisions dwindled, and whispers of curses grew louder. Warriors muttered of the firekeeper's extinguished flame, fearing the gods had abandoned them. Still, Eric pressed on, driven by a madness that blinded him to all but the horizon. Then, at the edge of despair, land rose from the mist, green, untamed, vast. The promise of the scroll was real. The West was not myth, it was truth. But triumph soured quickly. On the shores, ruins were found, not untouched wilderness, but remnants of a settlement older than their voyage. Strange carvings marked the stones, blending Norse runes with symbols Adin recognized from distant Celtic monks. The revelation struck like lightning. The Vikings were not the first. Others had come, lived, and vanished. The West was not destiny. It was a graveyard of forgotten explorers. The truth shattered Eric. He raged that the gods had mocked him, that his glory was stolen by ghosts. His fury turned inward, lashing at his own men. In the chaos, Astrid confronted him. Their clash was not of swords alone, but of visions. Eric clinging to conquest, Astrid fighting for survival. It ended on the very shore of the New World. Eric fell, not by Astrid's hand, but by his own pride, rushing headlong into battle with a storm at his back, swallowed by waves as if the sea itself had claimed him. Astrid and Adin stood among the survivors, staring at the strange horizon. They understood the revelation with chilling clarity. The Vikings had reached beyond their known world. They had glimpsed a future of connections across oceans, but they had also carried with them betrayal, blood, and curses. The saga of the North was not a tale of noble explorers or savage raiders. It was both, and neither. The Vikings were the bridge between worlds, their legacy tangled in glory and ruin. The final revelation was this: they had changed history forever, but never in the way they had imagined.